Brought to you by Moonbeam Multimedia.
This is 16 to 1, a podcast about education, teaching, and learning.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Happy Eclipse Eve.
Oh.
We're recording on the eve of the...
We are.
We've been talking all week about how there seem to be a great number of portents occurring. We've been dealing with tornadoes, and this week there was an earthquake. There were several earthquakes, right? And now there's eclipsing.
Yeah, all of the tweets are like, man, if this was a few hundred years ago, this would be a great time to accuse somebody you hate of witchcraft.
I mean, it is a little spooky, even if it's just random chance that it's all happening.
I'm not thinking about it.
Yeah.
I'm not thinking about it.
Okay.
Well, it has been a weird week, and as Ohioans, it's been a tough 6 weeks.
Yeah.
We've had 3 tornado warnings in central Ohio.
Where we are, yeah.
Which means that
3 nights of terror in the basement with the animals.
1 early morning, 2 nights of terror.
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of for reference, for those of you unaware of where Ohio is, we aren't in Tornado Alley. We are not a historically tornadic state.
Tornadic.
I saw
that those maps have kind of shifted to the east, though.
It would appear so.
Yeah, we're now kind of in it.
But can confirm. Since February, I would suggest we are a Tornado Alley.
Yeah.
I feel like so much has happened since we last recorded.
Yeah.
Okay, so now that the world is actually shifting and rocking and rolling.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, we're going to jump into bad news. As I was looking at the first one, I was like, so more bad news.
Yeah, this is our... This is the section of the show where we round up the latest education news and headlines going on around the country and around the world. And we are, unfortunately, starting with a bit of bad news for teachers right here in our home state of Ohio.
Ohio is set to increase the pricing for teacher licensing fees, which has obviously sparked concern and debate. So Ohio's teachers' licensing fees are already among the highest in the region, and this change is being proposed in order to prevent the Ohio Board of Education from having a $3.5 million budget shortfall next year. Critics, including Ohio Education Association President Scott DeMauro, are pointing to our governor, Mike DeWine's restructuring of our ODE into ODU, as we have already talked about multiple times.
Yeah.
So we went from the Ohio Department of Education to the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce.
Yeah.
Critics are suggesting that maybe all of this switcheroo from one thing to the same thing but with a new name isn't that great.
The Ohio Board of Education is a separate entity from those things that is in charge of the licensing and accreditation stuff.
And they're having an election right now, too, which is adding to it.
But basically, like, there was no budget, but there's still for the board, but they're still mandated to do all of this licensing stuff.
And on top of this, our election that just happened, the way that people are voting right now is also because of what the promises are being made about the retirement age. And so not only are we trying to vote for people who might make retirement feasible for us, but on top of that, we're also being told that we're in a teacher shortage and also you have to pay more to get your license fees.
That's what kills me about this, is that Ohio has been making some concerted effort to address a teacher shortage. And
in word only.
Yeah, that's what
they're not actually doing anything.
This is one of the things that would directly impact a teacher shortage, I would think.
This switch to ODU has not quite solved any of the problems. And the unfortunate part of both of these groups, who are now just pointing fingers like a Spider-Man meme at each other, is all the teachers like me standing between them, making maybe a tenth of what they make, right? And I'm down here like, money for the poor. Like, that's how it feels. Like, I truly feel like
Penny
mommy
for
and
the
daddy
baby, sir.
are fighting over top of me. We're great. We're full of tornadoes and fewer teachers.
Tornadoes and teacher licensing fee increases. Okay.
Anyways.
our second headline, we're talking about Oregon, which has responded to a growing literacy crisis. We've been talking about this for, it feels like years now on this podcast probably, but we are in a crisis of literacy in this country, and we need to start acting like it and doing things to address it, which Oregon apparently is. So they have so far distributed about $28 million in grants aimed at bolstering reading education. I was reading some different reporting about this, and according to NPR, surveyed schools in Oregon remain nearly 2/3 of a year behind pre-pandemic levels in reading, and also that learning loss in Oregon is roughly 2 to 3 times worse than national averages. And I was trying to find out why that might be. There were people saying that Oregon tends to more radically leave decisions up to local control, like way more than we do here, for example. And in fact, they actually used Ohio's rapid response, both in like spinning up initiatives and allocating funding to deal with pandemic stuff. I gotta hand it to Ohio that the pandemic response was pretty swift with regard to getting school funding to address certain things and stuff. But anyway, they actually kind of contrasted it with how Ohio works in this one article, and saying the lack of coordinated response in Oregon, because there is so much local control, contributed to
those
deepening this literacy issue post-pandemic.
Next, chronic absenteeism. Would you like an update?
I would love an update. Yes, please.
Schools across the nation are facing an alarming increase in student absences. Recent Pew Research data polled educators across the nation, and 61% of high school teachers said chronic absenteeism was a problem at their schools. And researchers are pointing to a cultural shift in the wake of COVID-19 concerning our relationship to school.
Yeah, it was 61% of high school teachers. It was like 40-something% of middle and elementary school teachers. I don't remember, but it's a lot. And chronic absenteeism is usually categorized as like, what, 18? You miss 18 days of school throughout the year. That means
ours is all done by hours, but however it's translated,
Yeah. So you miss, if a student misses more than 18 days within a school year, or roughly that, they're considered chronically absent.
I don't think I would say that COVID is the hard line of that for me.
You don't think so?
No, I mean, did it exacerbate it for some? Sure, but I would certainly say that since I've been teaching, I've seen it kind of steadily go. But another factor of this is the school district that I work in, we are uniquely situated. We are in 2 counties, which isn't all that common for a lot of Ohio schools, because counties in Ohio are actually pretty large considering, other places. But because of that, our 2 counties, the courts handle chronic absenteeism differently. And so
that's such a pain.
Yeah. So our administrators have to deal with attendance differently based on which county it comes from. So in one of our counties,
like how they deal with truancy differs and stuff like that.
Yeah, and just hours. Like in one county, they can get an appearance in court much sooner than they can in another county.
Wow.
And so you could have 2 kids who sit side by side who miss the same amount of days, and one has been to court maybe once, twice, 3 times, and one hasn't been given a court date yet. One might already have somebody in the system helping them, like a parole officer or something like that, right? But the other one maybe has missed a whole 9 weeks because the court won't see them until they hit this mark, because the court is so inundated with absenteeism cases.
Yeah.
Even in schools like mine, where we have 2 courts in 2 counties, we see kids treated so differently that it is a really interesting factor.
That's a struggle for me. And even that, plus this story of what's going on in Oregon, I believe that there are strengths to be found in local control of educational systems, but for reasons like that, like what you just described,
nice. Yeah,
like
I know
the administrative overhead, the burden of administrative overhead that is passed on to boots on the ground educators because of these kinds of things. Those are cases where I want to say, what good is coming of this being left up to differences in county jurisdiction? Yes. Like, couldn't an Ohio school board or whatever, couldn't a state level group work with the court system in Ohio to determine this is how we're going to deal with this? I don't know.
Well, and because as part of that, at my school, we aren't a huge school. We don't have 8 or so administrators who we have 2. So we lose one of our administrators maybe a day or 2 a month because he's in court all day doing these things.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Okay. And then our last item, this
is nice.
This is not a headline, but I'm throwing it in here so that our listeners know. Teacher Appreciation Week is coming up. It is going to go from May 6th to May 10th, 2024. Plan ahead. Mm-hmm. Find a way to acknowledge the hard work of the teachers in your life.
Please.
Okay, are we ready to get into our main topic for this week?
We are talking about the Operation Varsity Blues scandal.
Yes.
Which is the college admission scandal. Well, it came to news, I guess, in March of 2019, but had been going on for quite some time prior to
Yes. We're going to talk about it a little bit, the conditions that made it possible, the mastermind behind the college admission scandal, and what some of the ripple effects have been in broader educational policy conversations because of this whole thing.
So March 2019, Operation Varsity Blues hits the news. This is the name that had been given to and this is the definition from the AP News. The biggest college admissions scam ever prosecuted by the U.S. Justice Department, with the parents accused of paying an estimated $25 million in bribes.
Yeah. And this was over a long time. This was over years and years that this was happening.
They think it could have gone back to as early as 2011.
Man.
Uh-huh. Or that's kind of where his work started. But in total, more than 50 people were charged with bribing college officials, coaches to help their child, or maybe multiple children, be admitted into the college of their choice.
And these are elite, highly competitive colleges and universities. Yeah. Most of them.
So the bribery was made possible by a guy named Rick Singer, and his company was called Edge College and Career Network, or The Key.
That sounds culty to me. I'm going to just throw it out there. I saw the guy's materials from his company. Even they look kind of culty. It looks like you're being inducted into a secret society when you get these materials.
They kind of were.
Yeah. The secret society of don't tell the feds. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So essentially, Singer would have people make donations to his foundation to side door students in the colleges.
Side door.
And so you would donate to the Key, which was the front from which he paid the bribes. And so from there, he would pay universities, coaches, whatever. And all of those payments to the Key were tax exempt.
Yeah.
So he had a foundation that people paid into.
It's so brazen.
And from the foundation, he bribed people.
Lucky you get to make a tax exempt bribe.
Yeah. So the amount that these people would pay would range from tens of thousands of dollars and up to over even $6 million. Oh, and this money was separate from any other donation a person may or maybe would have made to a college or university. Mm-hmm. So just for some context, students front door into a college by getting in on their own.
I love how we're like ways of getting into college have become so convoluted and gross and tied up with family and generational wealth that we have to call normal college admissions front door as if it is something special to get in by the front door. Okay.
And then there's the back door, which is like legacy admissions. And so that's usually because you've donated so much money towards a building or to the school or towards whatever.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then basically what Rick Singer created and exploited was the side door, which was using bribes to work with people inside the university.
He's so slippery, this guy. And I really didn't realize that there was like a single mastermind behind this when this case first came out. I knew that there was like a company that was kind of facilitating this whole process, but I didn't really know that it was like the brainchild of this one con man, Rick Singer. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that. So that was interesting to learn in doing some research for this. We watched what was it, a Netflix documentary?
It was called, I think, Operation Varsity Blues.
Yeah. So some of this information came from Operation Varsity Blues, that documentary, which is worth a watch. A lot of it was focusing on this one man being the mastermind. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we talked about how this legacy admissions situation and the fact that wealthy families can donate millions of dollars, this backdoor way of getting a second look at your child's admission status. And that's what they're able to do. They're able to get a second look, whatever that means. I think the fact that that is supposedly okay to do, that in and of itself led to this scenario of side doors being available. Because if you are taking a second look at anybody's admission status because of money donated, then I don't see how you avoid falling into this kind of scenario that we're going to describe Rick Singer taking advantage of. So anyway, okay.
There's basically two ways that this side door option worked. Okay. So one way that this worked was by Singer and his group bribing lower profile school sport coaches at the universities to accept these students as potential recruits for an athletic team.
Yeah.
So oftentimes what this meant they would make them an athlete of maybe like tennis or sailing or something like that. It's not going to be a football. It's not going to be a really high profile team.
It has to be something easy to fake.
It does. And so basically what they would do is like Photoshop them doing the thing.
Yeah.
And they would provide that to the coach, accepting the bribes as a way to get that student enrolled. And this would normally work because coaches were usually trusted in terms of their recruiting, and schools would consider those athletes differently. And that would kind of side door them in.
Yeah, I thought that was so interesting how Rick Singer, he was very meticulous. In the Netflix documentary, there was a part where it was like a recreation of a wiretapped call. So it was like really dialogue that he actually said to parents, but he was talking about like, oh, make sure, like they were staging this photo shoot for this one kid who was going to apply it for like water polo, I'm pretty sure.
And they had him standing in the pool.
His family's pool, like not a school, like his family's outdoor pool.
And over half of his body was visible because they do not know how to play water polo.
Yeah, he's like halfway out of the water. He's like up to his waist out of the water. And they're like, how is he doing that?
His legs are so strong. Can you imagine being so good at water polo that your entire upper body is out of the water? He's a mermaid.
So Singer would pay attention to stuff like that and be like, no, we need to make this look like he's actually playing this sport. But he would go and look up like for sailing teams. He would go and look up regatta schedules and like backfill these kids' supposed college careers with supposed regattas that had actually occurred. He'd done his research, but there was no. So these kids weren't on these. I just can't imagine. There was a lot of footage of interview with the sailing coach at, what was it, Stanford? I think his name is John Vandemore. You got to watch that because you kind of feel for the guy. He describes how he was taken in by Singer, basically.
And
he describes himself being conned in real time.
And the thing about Vandemore that was different than others was that all of the money he received, he put into the program.
Yes.
He did not pocket any dollar of it.
No, he didn't personally enrich himself from this bribery scheme. And I kind of, hearing the guy talk about it, he sounds like he didn't know he was being bribed either.
I don't think he did. I think he thought that he was making a connection with someone who may eventually have an athlete for him.
I think he thought that he found somebody to support the Stanford sailing team.
That's what I mean.
And he was like, and the athletic director at Stanford directly influenced his thinking on this.
Yeah, because he was like,
him.
oh, I know Singer.
Yeah, the guy's like, I know him. He's like a friend of the program or the athletic program or whatever. So I think the sailing coach was just like, oh, well, this guy is supporting athletics at Stanford. He's made a sizable donation to the sailing program. I can have a whatever, like a recruiting relationship with him, I guess, because it sounds like he's just doing a good job of donating to my program.
Yeah. So I don't blame him.
I blame him a little bit. And here's where I blame him. He didn't do his due diligence on the student athletes that were coming to the program through this method. He had an opportunity to be like, wait, something's not right here because this student isn't really a sailor. Like, that's where it seems like he could have been like, there's a red flag.
Did he actually
here.
receive any athletes from Singer for that reason?
I thought that there was one.
The way I interpreted that was more as Singer paving the way for future.
Oh, okay. So you're saying like he received a donation that would have maybe, but
I kind of wondered if
but he
that
got
wasn't
caught before the whole thing fell apart.
Like I bet
before.
Singer had somebody lined up and then it didn't. Anyways.
Okay. Well, I'm going to have to, I'll need to check into that. But I guess there was something about it that I think rubbed him the wrong way, even from his own testimony. He was like, this seems a little weird. But it did seem like he was just caught up in an institutional culture of allowing this kind of thing to go on.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit more, because this wasn't just about this sort of athletic side dooring. There was also manipulation of standardized test scores. Let's talk about that.
So another way that Singer accomplished this was by having students receive medical documentation that allowed them to have extended time on the ACT or the SAT. And so what this would allow that student to do is to take a test with a proctor in a one-on-one setting. And these proctors were ringers, basically. These were people that would sit with the student. The student would take the whole test but write it on a separate sheet of paper. When the student left, the proctor would go over the answers, correct them, and then submit a test that scored them in whatever range they had.
A proctor hired by Rick Singer, by the way. That's the operative part here.
Yes. And so basically these people would be told they're trying to get a 32 or whatever on the ACT.
Yeah, Rick Singer would be like, we'll get you whatever score you want. So like whatever score you think your child needs to have to get into whatever school they want, we will make it exactly that school.
Yes.
I think these things worked together. Rick Singer kept talking with all of these parents on these wiretapped calls about how it's this like total package of services that he's kind of offering. And it sounded like he had started off being a more legitimate
I think he
college
did.
I think he
really
and
did.
Career coach. So he'd started off providing consulting services to wealthier families to help kids get into prestigious colleges. Like he started off really knowing the college admissions landscape, and then it morphed into this thing where he's like, oh, I can provide a guarantee to parents that their kids can get into these elite universities. And obviously the second you say it's all taken care of, it's a guarantee, people are like, oh. Anyway, the Netflix documentary is definitely worth a watch because a lot of it is recreated, like I mentioned, from
the wiretaps.
Federal wiretapped phone calls between Rick Singer and these parents. And the way that these parents talk about their children is kind of horrific. And we learned through listening to this that a lot of times the kids had no idea this was happening.
We'll talk about that some too.
There are lots of parents talking to Rick Singer about how do I hide the specifics of how all this is working from my kids, because my kids are smart and they're going to ask questions. They're going to know something is up with that and they're going to wonder what is going on.
Yep.
And his answer is always like, well, you don't need to tell them anything.
Yeah.
I'm like, what do you mean?
He was such a smoocher. So
he's a smooth talker.
Yeah.
Like this guy is a salesman for sure, a con artist to the nth degree. It's fascinating. And there were some big names that got caught up in this case, as you can imagine, because we're talking something on the order of millions of dollars. So who all got kind of swept up in this scandal? This is the reason why it was such big news.
I mean, most notably, Lori Loughlin and Felicity Huffman both went down in this scandal. In total, though, there were nearly 60 people wrapped up in it.
It's like all of our childhood television stars were taken out in one fell swoop.
There were at least 31 parents accused of paying bribes. We're talking like lawyers, physicians, CEOs, celebrities, real estate moguls, designers. We're going to talk a little bit about like what these people served as far as like what came of their guilty decision. But these people could afford to post bond. These people could afford great representation. And so what they actually served was a fraction of probably what they rightly deserved. But
there was a lot of discussion about whether or not the punishment fit the crimes in this case. Yeah.
So Felicity Huffman, who's married to William H. Macy.
Who are those people?
They're actors.
Yeah, okay.
So Felicity Huffman paid to have SAT scores altered. She served a 14-day prison sentence. She was fined $30,000. She had to do 250 hours of community service, and she was on supervised release for a year. Nearly everybody got a supervised release for some amount of time.
This sounds like Hollywood sentences.
It is.
Okay.
But it's in Boston, but it is.
Okay.
Lori Loughlin, she and her husband paid $500,000 to have both of their daughters accepted into USC. This is so funny because they had been accepted into USC as coxswains for the school's crew team, even though neither of them had ever done it.
No crew participation.
No.
I think it's really funny that they were coxswains. Like the having gone to school on the East Coast, I don't know as much about crew as I really should, but aren't those the people who tell everybody else how to row?
Is it really?
I think those are the coxswains. So anyway, that is kind of humorous, yeah.
Also, Lori Loughlin, one of her daughters was TikTok famous. And so that was one of the reasons that people were like, this is not adding up. Because that daughter had flat out all the time been like, I hate school, I hate school, I hate school.
She wanted to drop out of high school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Lori Loughlin served 2 months in prison. She paid a $150,000 fine. She did 100 hours of community service. And then after that, she had a 2-year supervised release. So other parents served anywhere from between 3 weeks to 9 months in prison. They all paid a fine. They all were required to do some amount of hours of community service. And most of them had some kind of a supervised release because they were able to just shimmy their way right into that deal. And a couple of them actually did have their convictions overturned because their representation was able to argue that the parent genuinely believed that they were making a donation to the school.
I don't mean to be making excuses for these people at all, but I will say that listening to some of the recorded conversations, it did convince me that some of them didn't know
The full extent.
Yeah. Some of them, I think, actually didn't. They should have asked more questions, for sure. Like, there's no way if somebody comes to you with this sweet deal that you shouldn't ask questions. But I do think some of them were just sort of like assuming that this was another way that their wealth could open doors for them. But like, when you start to think about the test score changes and like, the faking of athletics,
I think the test score changing one is like a whole other level.
Yeah, you're straight up cheating. It's pretty obvious that you're straight up cheating in that case. Like, I don't know how you explain that away to yourself.
But I think that there is a world in which schools consider students because of athletics, and those students go to that school and never actually participate in the athletics. And maybe that wasn't the deciding factor in their admission, but I think that one could be more slippery, if you will.
How are the coaches dealt with in the wake of this? The coaches at all of these schools?
So there were 10 coaches, and they came from the University of Texas at Austin, Georgetown, Wake Forest, multiple coaches from USC, Yale, UCLA, and Stanford.
Wow.
They served anywhere from 6 months of home confinement or from 5 months to 30 months in jail. Most of them had supervised releases. They paid a fine, and nearly all of them had to forfeit whatever kind of bribe money that they had accepted.
Yeah. Some of them did take money just for their own personal enrichment.
Yeah. So those were the schools wrapped up in it. There's a lot of talk about other schools that could have been impacted in some way, but we'll kind of talk about that later, because some of the children of the parents actually went to schools other than those. And so people were always like, well, how'd you get in there? You know?
Yeah, I feel for the kids who were caught up in this.
I mean, too.
I feel for kids of celebrities anyway, because they live their entire lives under a different kind of scrutiny. But some of them may have known this was happening, or some of them are just so oblivious that they'll never know when this kind of thing is happening. But it does feel like they're going to walk through their lives with a cloud over their heads forever because of what their parents did here. Yeah.
So the coaches, to my knowledge, they all lost their jobs.
Okay.
But at the center of it was Rick Singer. He did plead guilty. He was sentenced in Boston for charges including racketeering conspiracy, money laundering conspiracy, conspiracy to defraud U.S., and obstruction of justice. Yikes.
Amazing.
He was sentenced to 42 months in prison with 3 years of supervised release, and he had to forfeit $8.7 million. Jeez. The 2 employees ended up with their time served, 1 year to 3 years of supervised release, and paid back tens of thousands of dollars. One was his employee, and the other was an accountant that worked for him during that time. And so the last group of people were the teachers, the test administrators, and the private instructors. So these were the people guilty of administering the test, changing the answers, and serving as a middleman for the bribes. Most of them ended up serving anywhere from 4 months to a year. They had supervised releases. One had 3 months of home detention and a year of supervised release. And then also most of them had to forfeit thousands of dollars that they had accepted in the bribes.
Yeah.
So this was the guy who took tests and that kind of thing.
Got it.
So worth noting about all of this scandal is that none of the students, the children, were charged. Did they have differing levels of understanding? It seems so. Actually, William H. Macy, his daughter was denied entrance to Juilliard, and Macy wrote to the court suggesting that it had been because of the mother, Felicity Huffman's involvement in the scandal. So would their daughter have gotten into Juilliard? It's hard to say. William H. Macy argued it was because of this that she was not admitted into Juilliard.
That was his defense, part of his defense.
Right.
Like, oh, please have leniency because my daughter didn't get into Juilliard.
Right.
Which is one of the most competitive schools in the world, probably.
Yeah.
Okay.
So many children said that they were unaware of what their parents had done, which that could be very possible, that they don't know the extent.
There's at least some evidence for that in the wiretap recordings, because there There are multiple parents in those recordings who say, basically, they're trying to ask how to obscure all this from their kids. How do I make sure my kids don't find out I'm doing this? Which indicates to me that they know it's wrong.
Yeah.
But, you know.
And so just a couple other things that happened to these students. Some had been admitted into other schools not related to the scandal, even though their parents maybe did give some money somewhere. Some had enrolled at the school after being wrongly accepted, and they were allowed to say. One of the New York Times articles said that, this is the quote, Yale, Stanford, Georgetown, Northwestern, and the University of Southern California each expelled students or revoked students' admissions. Some students who were seniors in high school when their parents were arrested had their college applications denied or were forced to withdraw them.
Yeah.
Which I can understand on the college side of it, why you're trying to be sure that your eyes and your teeth, you know, everything's all wrapped up nicely with a little bow.
Yeah. It's a really bad look for these schools, too.
It is.
It's a really, really bad look for these schools. And
like Northwestern was on that list, and Northwestern wasn't one of the schools, none of their admissions people or coaches there.
Right.
So that
makes
tells
you wonder.
Yes, that's what I was kind of referring to earlier when other schools were like, what does that mean? You know, those types of questions.
Uh-huh. My biggest takeaway from all of this is that our college admission system is completely broken.
Yes.
And prestige schools and prestige-based competition and admissions seems to be doing much more harm than good. Mm-hmm. I think the documentary even pointed this out at one point. It's like there are these admissions counselors saying the game has really changed, and students are now obsessed with getting into these elite colleges and universities where we have so many options in higher education in this country, and yet so many students are focused on gaining admission to such a small number of them. Why is that? How did we get here? What do we need to do to change this whole system so that this kind of scandal can't happen? So I guess my first question is merit-based college admissions, is that just a myth?
It is.
True. But we all sit around and kind of agree happily to this myth that is how people get into school. How do we need to reform this whole process to increase transparency and accountability? I know that like one of the things that people were saying could help here is test optional admissions policies. Yeah. We've been talking about that a whole lot because a lot of these elite universities are now doing away with their test optional policies. They suspended test score policies during COVID because a lot of people didn't have access to test centers or couldn't get them in a timely fashion. And now a lot of them are starting to reinstate them. And that worries me because the standardized tests were a very big part of this scandal. The fact that they could be easily gamed, the fact that this Proctor situation could happen, and the fact that we already know, and nobody hides this fact, we already know that, for example, SAT scores tend to highly correlate with family income levels. Yeah. I don't know. Where are we on this? What do you think?
I wish that when I was coming up that I would have had more options that were test optional. I know I've talked about this. I'm a horrible test taker. I did not score anywhere near the ACT score that I probably would have needed to even go to some, pretty impressive state schools at the time. But I think I could have done it. You know what I mean? Like, I think I could have been a good student at a lot of schools. And I felt very restricted by my test scores. Which isn't to say that I'm not sitting here thinking, like, I could go to Yale. Like, I don't believe that. But I do think that I probably adjusted based on my ACT score because of my fear of who that made me as a learner, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I think I could have been a great student at a lot of other schools. And I'm thrilled with what I did and where I ended up. But I see a lot of my kids and I see that in them too. I see those hesitant test takers and the nerves and things like that. And so that's one reason that I like the test optional idea. And this, I think we've even talked about this with the terms of the ACT in previous episodes where students are getting higher grades, but ACT scores aren't improving, right?
Grade inflation.
And so when we talk about grade inflation, then what is the grade equalizer? And so when all of these things are moving so drastically, I don't know how a college looks at a kid and knows who they are. You know, are they just wealthy?
Yeah.
Could they just afford the tutor or whatever?
Right.
You know?
The reason that these universities become so highly competitive is just like, you know, I mean, a lot of it is just history. They've been around for so long.
Yeah.
But the prestige and like college rankings create just craziness around this concept. I think that the college ranking system is kind of destructive and based on nothing.
Lies.
Except no, it's based on basically like how elite, quote unquote, your school is. What percentage of applicants do you actually end up admitting? And that's just all marketing. Like all of that is how well do you market yourself to the world? So the idea that quality in education translates to a very small percentage of students being admitted, that is false. And I think that institutions that choose not to participate in those ranking systems are probably onto something.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And it's hard because then they don't have the competitive edge that all of these other schools do who are scrambling to top the rankings charts. But I think that there is something to be said for schools that opt out of that racket.
That makes sense. On my end now as a teacher, it's been a little bit different because I've had students apply to, you know, those schools, those Ivy League schools. I've had students attend. So it's been exciting for those students, but I can also tell you that those are some of the students that probably suffered the most from very intense educational. This isn't a specific science, but some mental health concerns directly related to their
100%.
You know what I'm trying to say? Like those were some of the kids that I worried about the most as they were coming up because I was like, oh Lord, you're wound so tight. The one thing I would wonder about is when they took the test scores, how it was reported to the schools. Because there is a chance that they could have been taking the ACT in a gap year or something like that, post high school graduation. I don't know if that was the case for any of them. I think a lot of them were seniors at the time, the students. That would be an interesting way to kind of loop around the guidance counselor.
I mean, it sounds to me like they took it whenever Singer could arrange for them to take it with the fake proctor.
Yes, but those dates are still nationally decided. It's just that he had a setup for those dates to work whatever.
Yeah.
So that would be maybe one workaround for a college or for a high school guidance counselor. Because like when you do the ACT, you have it sent to whatever schools and then, you know, whatever.
By a workaround, you mean an opportunity for them to realize that something is amiss? Is that what you're saying?
Actually, a way to avoid it. Because say you took a gap year after high school and then took the ACT in that gap year, I don't know how that would be reported back to your high school if you've already completed a high school graduation. Now, a student like Lori Laughlin's kid to get like a super high ACT score would have probably raised some alarm bells just based on the fact that she flat out said, I want to drop out of high school. That seems unlikely. I am curious to know if these coaches had said that these were like preferred walk-ons or something like that, because that might give special consideration. But I can't imagine still me and our schools and our guidance counselors not knowing that a student played water polo.
Yeah, that's my thing. Is it like maybe the size of the school has something to do with this? The size of the staff? Like, I think I'm just looking for holes in the system where this could pop up. And I think that like understaffed guidance offices is one place.
Now, I will say this is something that I have had happen. We had a student go to a state university. It's a D1 program. And she had the scores to already go to that school. But she actually got recruited to be on the rowing team. She was a three-sport athlete at the high school and was recruited to row. And she did end up going and rowing for this university.
Meaning she like hadn't rowed before?
Yeah, she had never rowed before, but she was like the perfect build for a rower. And she was super athletic and all of these things. And I think she was already enrolled or had already been admitted into the school and then made contact with that coach and was like, I'm kind of interested. And so she did end up going to be a rower there.
Yeah, that's what I think is really difficult here, because you can have scenarios where you are recruiting student athletes who do not have experience in the sports.
For sure.
Yeah, that does happen too.
We all know I'm a high state Buckeyes fan here, but there was a stretch of time in which all of our football kickers
Yes.
were rugby players from Australia.
Yeah. Or soccer players, I've
or
heard.
converted soccer players.
That's what
right?
I was thinking of.
Our guidance counselors could say, oh, this kid is a stud athlete.
Right.
He could absolutely convert to a football player from a rugby player or from a soccer, or for that girl I'm thinking of, she was a track athlete, a cross country athlete, a basketball athlete. I could see the conversion to something of like rowing, right? But that also requires you to know your students, just like that guidance counselor did that was in the special.
I think my takeaway from all of this is that the more and more that we buy into the idea that, well, it's not even like we have a choice. I mean, the more and more that we are subjected to a system where college, like higher education, is a commodity that we buy to gain entrance to future life opportunities, the more this is likely to happen, because it's like we're all competing for a limited resource of education. And it's just like, I don't know. It just kills me. It just feels like we have lost our way. We need to reevaluate criteria by which we rank these colleges. We need to reevaluate admission systems. We need to reevaluate the way wealth enters the equation. There are so many opportunities for bad actors to game this system. And to a certain extent, it's not much of a wonder that people are losing faith in the value of these degrees, is because this is the system.
I do like kind of keeping up with former students to know where they end up and when they end up. And so when I see one of our kids get into an Ivy League, like a UPenn or Harvard Med or something like that, it's very satisfying because I know they did it right. And, like for those students, they didn't know they didn't do it right. And that would have been a hard thing to reckon with, was my parents have no faith or trust in me to do something for myself.
That's my takeaway.
And that's hard. It's hard.
We just need to value the right parts of the education system. We need to value the point of it all. And the point of it all is not to buy your way to a degree. The point is to become a better human being through learning. Anyway.
All of the links are in the show notes for all of our resources if you would like to go and read more about the Operation Varsity Blues scandal.
Are we ready for fill in the blank?
Let's do it.
Our trivia section of the show. If you know the answer to this week's question, write into us, hello@16to1.com. If you know the right answer, send us your mailing address too, and we'll send you some 16 to 1 stickers. Write in, say hello. Even if you don't know the right answer, write in and say hello.
Yeah, just
and
say hi.
Yeah, we'll still send you some stickers.
We just want to know you're out there.
Yeah, we do. All right. Do you want to do last episode's question first?
Sure.
Okay. What was that one?
So this question came from the beginning of March Madness for the NCAA tournament. So there's been a great push for women's sports in the last decade to receive the same funding and support as male D1 athletics. For a long time, the phrase March Madness was only allowed to be used in branding for the men's Division I NCAA college basketball tournament. In what year was the women's team finally allowed to also be referred to as March Madness? It was 2022.
Yikes.
Yeah. People called it that, but it was never formally
the women's tournament?
Yeah.
It wasn't officially March Madness.
It was not. It was not branded as March Madness.
Okay. Love that.
All right. What you got?
Well, since we've been talking about college admissions and standardized tests, this episode's question comes from the very first SAT. SAT was first tested by about 8,000 students in 1926. It was a 97-minute test. Consisted of 315 questions focusing on vocabulary and math. Time magazine released 8 of the original questions. So one of the questions here is from that original SAT. And that question was, if a man's salary is $20 a week. Wow.
I know. It's what I feel like.
If a man's
That's me as a teacher.
If a teacher's salary is $20 a week and he spends $14 a week, how long will it take him to save $300? This is a multiple choice question. So here are your options. A, 12 weeks. B, 50 weeks. C, 62 weeks. Or D, 120 weeks.
I wish that would have been my ACT kind of test question. I could have gotten into Yale.
All right. Now we are going to talk about what we learned. What did you learn in the last couple of weeks? What's been on your mind?
Just a few more things about sports. So more about March Madness.
Yes.
We recently watched the Final Four game for the women's tournament between Iowa and UConn. Mm-hmm. And it broke the record for the most watched women's college basketball game, which is very cool. But actually, it turns out that it did way better than anybody originally thought it did. That game alone had more viewers than every World Series game in 2023, every 2023 NBA Finals game, every Daytona 500 race since 2013, every Masters final round since 2013, and all but 5 college football games in 2023.
Wow.
It averaged 14.2 million viewers and it peaked at 17 million viewers. And all of that came from Richard Deitch's Twitter, and he writes for The Athletic. But actually, according to Rob Weil on Twitter, it is believed to have been the most watched basketball game ever on ESPN.
Wow.
Just that one game. And so the important note is that everyone really does watch women's sports. Mm-hmm. And also just something else that I've been keeping up on because it's that time of year. Huge baseball fan. This year, I'm just kind of telling people, keep an eye on how many pitchers that you hear about having Tommy John surgery, which is the UCL surgery of the elbow to repair that ligament. Mm-hmm. Because some people are suggesting that the pitch clock is negatively impacting elbow health. And that since the start of the pitch clock, there has been more Tommy John surgeries on average than previous years.
Wow.
Very interesting.
What's the thinking there? That like you're rushed and that you throw weirdly?
Yeah.
Because you're rushing against the pitch clock?
Yeah.
That's
you don't
so
have as long to gather yourself to whatever. There's a lot going on in Major League Baseball right now. There's a lot of unrest with fans and owners and
rule changes.
It's a very ugly time for baseball. And the players' union is involved and things like that. And
their uniforms are ugly.
That's among other, that's another awful thing. But the players' union did put out a statement about the pitch clock timing.
Huh.
A lot of people are suggesting it's actually because of the move to ban any sticky substances for pitchers when they're pitching. So,
well, they can't. What? They can't cheat with resin, and now that's a problem.
Basically, what they're suggesting is that because of the crackdown on resin and sunscreen and all of those other types of rosin or whatever it is, tar, right?
Pine tar.
Pine tar, yeah. They actually suggest that that might be the reason for more elbow injuries because the consistency of the baseballs.
Grip.
Well, the baseballs are a lower quality, according to pitchers, and what they used to be. And so there are a lot of pitchers suggesting that if they would change the baseballs to actually have more grip, then there would be fewer injuries. So there's kind of like two sides of it going on right now. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
A pitcher I was listening to in his interview was saying that before he'd used sunscreen and something else to make a sticky whatever, and that's how he would throw. And so he said he went cold turkey and removed all sticky substances. And he said that the day after throwing, he threw really well that day, but the next day he woke up and his arm hurt in places it had never hurt before. And it's because his grip had changed so much to hang on to the ball to make it do what he wanted it to do because he wasn't using a substance.
Well, yeah. I mean, I struggle with that one because they're not supposed to be using them at all.
Right. So people, of course, are like, so you were cheating and it was easier.
Yeah.
But also the health of pitchers is obviously crucial to baseball. And so it's kind of like everyone's pointing at each other saying, make the baseballs grippier and easier to throw. And we don't have to get in trouble for using sticky substances.
I feel like making the baseballs grippier would be a good way to solve this problem because at least everyone then is on an equal playing field for advantage.
The other thing this pitcher was talking about was even from ballpark to ballpark, the balls change, even though they're all whatever is supposed to be used that season. And so he said you can pitch with a ball that feels this way here and a ball that feels that way there, and that changes.
Deflate gate.
Yeah, basically.
Interesting.
So anyways,
okay.
If you care at all about the drama of Major League Baseball, there's plenty of it to have. But man, it's nice that it's back. I'm so thrilled to have baseball back. I've watched so many games. It's been wonderful. I bought the MLB Pass, and it's been so great. I've watched probably 15 games in a week.
You're a baseball girly.
I am. So, okay, what'd you learn? I see the anxious generation. This is going to be very casual of you.
The Anxious Generation is a book by Jonathan Haidt that I started reading in this past couple of weeks. It's examining the epidemic of mental illness, like anxiety, depression, things like that have hit adolescents in many Western countries that sort of started happening in the early 2010s. And this author argues that this crisis is triggered by what he calls the great rewiring of childhood. It started to occur between 2010 and 2015, where childhoods transitioned from being play-based to being phone-based due to the rise of smartphones and social media. He talks a lot about how the loss of free play and unsupervised outdoor goofing around time, combined with the constant presence of smartphones and social media, has interfered with our social and neurological development in numerous ways. It leads to issues like sleep deprivation, addiction, loneliness, social comparison, and perfectionism. And I'm not very far into this book yet. I'm really eager to see where it goes, but he presents a lot of data that creates a pretty strong suggestion that a smartphone-based childhood is not great for mental health.
Right.
I'm wondering if at the end of reading this book, I'm going to become a proponent of complete bans of smartphones from school settings. I'm wondering if I'm going to get there. I think that's kind of where he's heading.
Did you say when it was published?
It just came out.
Okay.
This is a brand new book.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm interested. You have to let me know.
Yeah.
That might be something I get into.
It's going to be hard to get from libraries. I actually bought it because I went and looked at the library and the wait time was like 4 months or something because it's a brand new book. But yeah.
I do have a lot of students. I would say probably more than half of every class of students carry a book with them.
A book?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Like a book for them. Like, we don't have backpacks, which is also important to remember. But I would say that probably more than half of every class of students, right? Maybe 12 or 14 per my classes. All of 12 or 14 of them are carrying a book of their own interest that they're just reading for fun. And that's higher than I've seen it in previous years. And I think that's very cool. So,
interesting.
Yeah. I will say, I know this is kind of going directly against what you're saying, but book talk is huge for my students. And that's how they find their books.
TikTok.
Yeah. And so my students will be like, I saw this on Book Talk, and it's whatever book. And they're like, you know what I found out? My mom will never say no to buying me a book. And I'm like, I love your mom.
Yeah.
Which I love that my kids are like, yeah, they'll buy me any book I want.
I, too, have often felt that there is a place and, a time and a place for these technologies, and that they can obviously work hand in hand with learning and can increase, can enhance educational outcomes. I think technology can certainly do that. I think Jonathan Haidt is making the argument that the ever-present push toward like social comparison and stuff like that, no matter what, it's just kind of like the possibility of your phone being there and having an impact on your social life, that ever-present watchful eye of social media is not worth it.
Yeah.
Like, it's not worth it. The potential benefits do not outweigh the harms. Maybe. I think that's maybe going to be one of the takeaways from this thing. And I might have to eat some of my words that I've even said over the years about the potential benefits of these technologies.
Yeah. I'm with you.
I still believe that we need to teach the responsible use of technology.
I do too.
No matter what.
I do too.
I've often said that I don't support completely banning technologies from educational settings, but I don't know. This guy might convince me. He might make the case. So. Okay. Any final thoughts? Wrapping up?
Goodbye, Varsity Blues. And I know you won't hear this until after, but I hope you don't stare directly into the eclipse.
Yeah. I hope your corneas are okay.
Talk to you soon.
Talk to you in 2 weeks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey listeners, thanks for supporting 16 to 1. We're your co-hosts. I'm Chelsea Adams.
And I'm Katie Day. Find our show notes, archives, and resources, sign up for our newsletter, or get in touch with us via the contact form at 16to1.com, all spelled out.
We are so grateful for our listener support. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the show and telling your friends or colleagues about it.
The show is edited and produced by you, Chelsea Adams, and you're also responsible for our show's music.
And you, Katie Day, serve as lead researcher and social media manager.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next show. Well, and if I may pull from maybe the most important TV show of all time as a point of reference in which I know the truth, Gilmore Girls, right?
Oh, okay.
Rory did not want to go to Yale. Yale was not her pick. Her grandfather went to Yale, and so she was a legacy at Yale. Now, Rory had the grades to get in. We all know Rory did. But that's the kind of family that, now they would have never, Richard would have never not let Rory do the right thing, right? He would have always done the right thing. But
I don't know. Doesn't he even talk about like potentially, he makes a donation on her behalf, right?
They named the building after her, but that was when she was already there.
Yeah, that's horrifying. Okay, so that was not to get her in. That was just to embarrass everyone, I guess.
No, that was just, they named that building after her.
They're like, it's a nice gift for you.
She's
like,
mortified.
I don't want that.
Because remember, she sees the model and she's like, no,
yeah.
your name is like huge.